Good afternoon. Thank you for making time to join our webinar. We're going to wait just a moment for everyone to come in from the waiting room. Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for making time again over your lunch hour for part 2 of our webinar series on SNAP changes in the Federal Reconciliation Bill. Today, we'll be talking about partners in accuracy. And just to kick us off, I'll tell you a little bit about Advocates for Ohio's Future and who we are. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan coalition of health and human services organizations. I'm the coalition manager. And what we do is we advocate for budget and policy solutions that help Ohioans live better lives. Of course, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program is part of that policy agenda that supports Ohioans and their health. And so I'm really thrilled to be able to offer this webinar this afternoon with two really incredible panelists who are going to dive into a lot of the questions that we know have been around and swirling after the reconciliation bill was passed earlier this summer. So just some quick housekeeping items. For all of you to know, this webinar is being recorded in full. We are going to send out the recording and the slides this afternoon to everyone who registered, and you'll also be able to access it on our website at advocatesforohio.org/webinars. That's also where you can find the part 1 webinar to view both part 1 and part 2 together. If you have a question as our panelists are going through their presentations, please add it to the Q&A box, and we're going to take all of the questions at the end of the webinar. Without further ado, I will turn it over to Rachel Cahill, who is a visiting fellow with the Center for Community Solutions, to start us off.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming back for part 2. If you missed part 1, please do go check it out. We talked about the broader SNAP changes that were in this bill, and today we're just focusing on the cost shift and the error rate implications for Ohio. So as Sarah said, I'm Rachel Cahill. I'm a visiting fellow with the Center for Community Solutions. I am based in the Cleveland area and really happy to be with you all here today. So I will let Betsy introduce herself.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Betsy Suver. I am the Deputy Director of the Office of Family Assistance in the Ohio Department of Job and Family Services. And in my office is the SNAP program.
So grateful to have Betsy with us today. She is a real leader in the SNAP space nationally. A lot of other SNAP directors in other states turn to her for guidance and wisdom. She wouldn't say that about herself probably, but it's true. So we are very lucky to have her in Ohio, and also
Thank you, Rachel.
You're welcome. Very happy to have you on this webinar too, to answer questions that I cannot answer. So, all right. I am going to start us off with just a little bit of context so that everyone comes along and feels like they can understand the conversation. I will reiterate a few things we shared in last week's webinar, but mostly we're kind of diving deeper into the topic. So we're going to talk about SNAP payment error rates. Betsy's going to share some information about how that impacts Ohio, how the changes in HR 1 impact Ohio, and also some of the key sources of error in SNAP in Ohio. And then I'm going to talk about how we can all kind of come together as partners in accuracy, counties, community organizations, the General Assembly. We need everybody to tackle this problem together. So we will try to leave lots of time for questions at the end because we know you all have a lot of them. All right, let's rock and roll. So just a little bit of context to get us started. SNAP funding has historically been paid for, the benefits themselves have been paid for 100% by the federal government. That is part of a national anti-hunger strategy, is so that the benefit value is the same no matter where you live. That's always been true in the program. This passage, as Betsy will describe for us, this law changes the responsibility to pay for the benefits themselves in a new way. So it's really a paradigm shift in SNAP that we're talking about. Along the same lines, historically, there's always been a sharing of costs for the administration of the program. So paying for caseworkers, paying for technology to actually operate the program. That has been a 50-50 split between federal and state governments. And in Ohio, we delegate the implementation to counties. So counties also play a role in that in our state. So this is kind of what SNAP has been for the past, 50 years. And we have major changes that have come in this bill that change how SNAP is funded that we're going to talk through. We're going to we're going to cover again today and then go a little bit deeper into it. Similarly, I wanted to just give a little bit of historical perspective on the payment error rate because it is such a big component of what that cost shift is made up from. The payment error rate is not new. It has always been part of SNAP's accountability system. By being a federally funded program, there's always been this way for the federal government to make sure that those benefits were being implemented or paid out correctly. It's always really permeated, I would say, SNAP culture to make sure that we have accurate payments. That is not new. And states have also been subject to corrective action. They have a financial penalty if they have 2 consecutive years of a payment error rate that exceeds the national average. So I just want to make sure people understand that this has always been a key metric, and there's always been accountability in SNAP for how benefits are issued. What the bill did is it turned up the volume really, really high on that accountability. So instead of talking about, 5 to 10 millions of dollars, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. So it's a very big shift, but that mechanism has always been there. So it was helpful for me to look back some years at where Ohio has been with their payment error rate. And I promise we're going to explain more about what the payment error rate is. But just to give you, we're all talking about 6% as the goal. Less than 6% is what has been talked about. And this is showing you just the last 5 years. We don't have data for 21 and for fiscal year 2020 and fiscal year 2021 because of the pandemic. But these are the last 5 years that we do have. And you can see Ohio has been fairly consistent between 7 and the high end being 9% of a payment error rate. To put that in context, I just put together a comparison of a few other Midwestern states who are kind of our peers. Minnesota is another county administered state. Wisconsin is kind of a regionally administered state, and Illinois is a state administered state. And then you can see the national average is this purple line. So Ohio has always been a pretty strong performer. We are generally well below the national average. And we're about in line with our peers. Wisconsin is the highest performer in the region. But the point is, getting below 6% is pretty hard to do. It was hard to do before the pandemic. It's been even harder to do since the pandemic. So we are really asking a lot of our state and county partners to be able to get below that 6% threshold. All right, so with that context, please add any questions to the chat, to the Q&A, but I'm going to turn it over to Betsy to go a little bit more into what has changed for Ohio.
And Rachel, I just wanted to kind of build off what you're saying, that like,
Sure.
we're not doing too bad when you look at things, and that SNAP is a really complex program. It is not just here are a few rules, you're eligible or you're not. So it's a lot that caseworkers have to know, understand. They typically do multiple programs, all with a little bit of a difference, right, between Medicaid, TANF, SNAP, childcare. Sometimes they do childcare. They're all in the same system. And so everything is a little bit different for each program, and then how they have to do it in the system. It's not easy. And so, and again, SNAP is you have to get the exact benefit right. It's not just a yes, no, were they eligible. So,
Yeah,
Rachel, anything else you want to say?
Yes, thanks for making that point. And I've actually been saying, I would love to kind of even flip the framing of how we're talking about it to talk about payment accuracy rates instead of payment error rates, because the truth is, my kids, if they come home with a 94% on a test, that is an A.
Right.
That is a excellent payment accuracy rate. But in this new paradigm, that is still leaving the state with a huge financial penalty. So if you looked at any program, any other program, and said the state is accurately paying 93% of the time, that would be a really high performing program. So that is a really important context to set.
Okay, now we can go forward. Thank you. The impact of HR1, Big Beautiful Bill, is that we not only have a share of the SNAP benefits if our rate goes over 6%. We are also experiencing an increase to our administrative costs by 25%. So effectively, when Rachel talked about the 50-50 percent share on administrative costs, it will now be 25% paid by the federal government and then 75% by the states. And then again, based on if our error rate is under 6%, we won't owe anything towards the benefits. But if it goes over 6%, there's a certain percentage we will have to pay towards them. So you can see we are being kind of squeezed to be even more perfect with less funding. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. This kind of shows a breakdown for Ohio. The administrative share costs change on October 1st, 2026. And from a state level, because we're state supervised and county administered, we'll lose about the loss of federal funds is about 20 million that we will have to make up or experience losses. And then also for the counties, the forecasted loss is $47 million per year. And again, that starts next October 1st. And then the benefit cost sharing doesn't start until October 1st of 2027. And they are going to base the percentage that we will owe based on either federal fiscal year 25 that we are in or federal fiscal year 26, which begins October 1st. We are currently just under 8% right now. It does not look like we'll get under 6% by the end of the federal fiscal year, but we still have some months of errors to go or cases to go through. So when you look at total, what Ohio could be having to come up with to operate the SNAP program, it would be a total of about 388 million net new general revenue funds per year. That's a shocking sticker price. Again, when Rachel said it was a paradigm shift, there is not a state in this country who is not experiencing that gasp of the bill. So, and you can see that based the table in the middle at the bottom, it shows your percentage based on your error rate. So anything between 6 and 7.99% would be 5%, and then 8 to 9.99 would be 10%, and then 10% or above is 15% of the benefits. And so we issue about $3.2 billion a year in SNAP benefits. And so based on our error rate of 20 for federal fiscal year 24, we would owe $321 million. So you can see, as Rachel said, we were doing pretty good, but a 97%, or gosh, I'm sorry, 93% will cost hundreds of millions of dollars. So doing okay and average is not okay anymore. So we'll go to the next slide. So what is in the middle of the screen is what I kind of already talked about, just kind of shows you a little more simplified. But what I really wanted to talk about is on the right on how the QC process basically works. It is a statistically valid sample that all states pull, and then they review the cases according to something called the FNS 310 handbook. So you have FNS issuing policy rules in the Code of Federal Regulations, and then their QC area has a review handbook. And most of the time they align, but not all of the time. And so we've been really, like, as we're getting errors because of a new interpretation of how something should be done, we kind of start scrambling in the background to make system changes, change notices, change policy to align with that, because we know there are some things that don't align perfectly. But we review about 85 randomly selected cases per month. They are, if there is an error of $57 or less, it doesn't go into the error rate. They give us, that's called like the threshold, the error threshold, that we wouldn't have to, so if it was a $10 overpayment or under issuance, then it wouldn't be reported as an error. So that said, what goes into the error rate is both an under issuance, meaning the family didn't get they got less than they deserved, or they got an overpayment, which they got more than they were eligible for. And so the other thing is both county errors in determining benefits and client caused errors go into the error rate. And so when I say a client caused error, clients have to report a few things, and one of them is if their income goes over the federal poverty eligibility level, and for their household size. So if they had like a 50-cent increase in their hourly wage, and that caused them to go maybe $50 over the eligibility limit, and they didn't report it because they forgot or they didn't think it impacted that much, then that would be an error to Ohio. So even though the state will have determined the benefit amount based on the information known to them correctly, if they were in fact having additional income that put them over the eligibility limit, then it's considered an error against the state. Let's see. And generally, the error rate does not include fraud. So if someone was purposely concealing their information or making false statements about their income on purpose, then under investigation, they would not be considered in the error rate. And one last thing about QC is that it's about 3 months behind that we're reviewing. So as we can't see error trends until about a quarter later. And so that kind of puts us at a disadvantage. And the other thing I want to say too, going back to some things Rachel said, is that it is what we've, in the past, you had a lot of people who had been caseworkers their entire professional career. And now you're seeing where there's a lot of turnover, and like a seasoned caseworker is like 3 years. And so it takes a while to train workers because a lot of complex program rules and there's multiple programs. So with that said, we'll go into the next slide. We've looked at the top 5 errors over the last 3 years. And from our sample, the total amount issued in error was $69,692, which brings me to another point. The error rate is not like a 1-for-1. You found an error and out of 5 cases, like 1 out of 5. It's really the dollar amount issued versus the dollar amount issued in error. So you total all the amounts or benefits issued in your sample, and then how much of that dollar amount was issued in error, and that's how you calculate your error rate. But when we look in 23, the majority of the errors were by the county workers, and that was about 73%, where the client errors were about 26. And then 23 is when our like pandemic waivers and policies started unwinding. And then in 24, you can start to see where the errors between client and county become pretty much equal, 50-50. And then now in 25, what we're seeing is that there's a little bit more county error but still a decent amount of client errors. And so the majority of errors came from the same 5 kind of circumstances. Again, client's failure to report income. We have some household composition errors occurring, failing to report a job. And when it says client and county error, we have some not reporting that. But also if they have reported, it becomes a county error because if the county hasn't worked it and changed the case. The incorrect dollar amount used in the budget, it seems like that would be super easy, but of course, there's always some detailed rules around how you calculate income. It's not just, well, here's their monthly amount. It's like if they're paid weekly, you got to multiply it by 4.3 and do the average. There's a lot going into everything, and then what's accountable income, what's not, what age is someone to count or not. Like we have a whole rule on excluded income or included it. It's not always simple. And then incorrect credit for expenses. You have standard utility allowances that based on what utilities they're paying, they get a certain allowance. And those, certain like rent agreements may say something about utilities in a wonky way, and so then it's incorrectly listed in the case. So those are our top 5 errors, but what we do know is that is basically the top 5 errors across the country as well. It's not just unique to Ohio. Some things we're trying to do to attack the rate. We know there's not one silver bullet that will solve this problem. We're looking at some policy waivers. We are making some system changes, focusing on some training, and we are also creating our own kind of find and fix team to help counties get ahead of errors before they're pulled. And to speak to 2 of the waivers we have submitted, 2 of a few waivers we have submitted. One is the FNS, our federal partner, interpretation of state merit staff of how much we can use automation has really prevented the SNAP program from kind of moving forward in technology like some of the other federal programs have. And so we've asked for a reevaluation of their policy stance on the use of automation under the state waiver or state merit staff rules. And then another thing is that it's not in federal law that client errors should be included in the SNAP payment error rate. We're arguing that, with so much financial skin in the game, the state should really be evaluated based on their actual calculation of benefits on information known to them. And so those are 2 of our biggest ones. A few others, but that's really some of the stuff we're doing. And to address client errors, we are changing some of our messaging on what needs to be reported to be very specific about income changes, not just all the stuff that should be reported, and then sending out some flyers. We've been working with the food banks to help spread the message as well. So that is what is happening with SNAP. Rachel?
Thank you for sharing all of that. I was vigorously taking my own notes for my own learning, and I just wanted to build on something you said for those who are newer to this topic area. There's a couple different ways that sort of the way the error rate is calculated is sort of fundamentally unfair. You mentioned one of them. You mentioned the state being held accountable for things that they couldn't have possibly known about, and then that's an error on the state. So that's one. I think the other one that is kind of shocks people when I explain it is the way actually the error rate adds together underpayments and overpayments. So I just talk about it as like the bad math.
Right.
My kids are in elementary school, and in elementary school, right, if you have a 7% overpayment and a 2% underpayment, 7 minus 2 would equal 5. But in SNAP error rate land, a +7 and a -2 equals 9. So the only upside of that, I think, from a community partner perspective, is to say that the state has equal interest in reducing underpayments
Yeah,
minimizing underpayments, just like you want to minimize overpayments. So we want people to get accurately paid in SNAP. And we, I think, can be a big part of making sure that that happens, including making sure people are getting the full benefit amount that they are entitled to.
agree.
All right, we have a ton of really good questions that are coming in. So I think I'm gonna cover just another slide or two, then pause for questions. And then I wanna do the last section where we go a little deeper into the community partnership opportunities. So Betsy, if you wanna start to preview them and decide
Yep.
which ones you wanna tackle and which ones I can help tackle, we can do that. But just a couple more points I wanted to make. Um, I just wanted to give you all this timeline. Betsy voiced it over, but in case you are a visual learner like me, wanted to reiterate that the federal fiscal year 2026 begins in a couple of weeks. And that is the fiscal year that's gonna be our best chance to get to the below 6%. As Betsy mentioned, right now, if we were to use fiscal year 2025, for the cost share that we're going to have to pay, we think maybe we'd be in that 5, maybe that 10%. So we have basically one fiscal year swing at getting below 6%. And so this isn't, even though when folks are looking at all of HR1's implementation, there are huge Medicaid changes, there are other changes happening. Some of those are a little bit more delayed than SNAP is. SNAP is like, it's go time, baby. So that's why we wanted to have this webinar now and help educate all of us about how we can help, because we really don't have any time to waste.
Yep.
All
So
right, so let's go
oh,
ahead.
go ahead, Rachel.
I
Yep.
was just going to say, let's take some questions now before
Okay.
we go to this section.
Yeah. So I've been looking through them. With the CHIP EBT cards, have we talked about taking advantage of the 50/50? Yes, those conversations are happening. We are trying to take advantage to do a lot of system changes too this year while we still have the 50/50. Let's see. Is the threshold of issuance error changing under OBB? No, it is. There was a version where they took out the threshold and made it 0, but it came back in, I think, by the Senate to 57. Thank God. And then why is the loss of admin funding in counties so much larger than the states? Because we actually give out most of the funding to the counties because they administer it. And so we have funding because we run the eligibility system, different technology stuff. We have, my staff, the QC staff, who do work up here as well.
And can I add on to that answer,
Yeah.
Betsy? I think it's also just important we aren't going to go all we talked about this a little bit on last week's webinar, but in some counties, some of the smaller counties, they just operate on essentially the amount of money that is designated for them. Other counties put in more money. So, up here in Cuyahoga County, we use levy dollars to draw down more federal match. So there's not a equal proportion impact across counties because some counties are putting in more of their own county dollars than others. Did I say that correctly, Betsy?
Yeah, and we do give some state GRF to counties to help administer, so we have that match as well. So yes, to your point, counties could be putting in more, but we give some state funds as well.
And Betsy, maybe we can I want to ask this sort of the big elephant question that's on here that I think we can both try to tackle is, somebody said, where on earth will the state get these funds? What happens if the state cannot secure the funds? Rebudgeting from other agencies, cuts to SNAP, question mark. What is your take on that question? And then I'll give my perspective, which might be a little different.
That is to be determined where funding will come from. I mean, I think there is still some, cinching of the belt that's going to happen, has already happened in some places. But, the intent, we know there are some states who said, if we have to pay this amount, we're not doing it. That is not the intent of Ohio. It's like from federal fiscal year 24, $3.2 billion in benefits. If you have to pay a certain percentage, that's still a huge economic impact to the state and keeping people fed. So
Thank you for that. That's really that's reassuring. And also, as an advocate, I can say I think it is important that we be talking to all levels of our leadership of our elected officials about this, from our county commissioners to our General Assembly in Columbus, as well as our federal delegation. Because Betsy mentioned sticker shock. Like, I think there's sticker shock even for our federal delegation when they actually see the numbers and cents for Ohio. And laws can be amended, laws can be changed.
yep,
So I do think we have some time to educate lawmakers and help them understand we don't want the SNAP program in jeopardy in Ohio. And so we can continue to evolve the law to make sure that that doesn't happen.
right.
All right, I'll take one more of these questions and then I'm gonna share, we'll have more time for questions at the end.
Yeah. There
Betsy,
was
there's
one
the
thing I
room
did want to
about.
say about the rates of counties. So it is a statistically valid sample that, is done through statistician. FNS has to review it. It's a, it's not that many cases, but when you have counties that have the majority of the caseload, they are obviously going to be the ones picking up errors, right? Just from statistical validity. And we have counties that don't have a case pulled and haven't for 3 years just because they're a small part of the caseload and they randomly didn't get pulled of these, 1,200 cases. And so to say that a county doesn't have an error rate is something we're trying to dispel. The state error rate is this, which means it's very statistically valid that it's happening in every county and the same 5 errors are happening everywhere. You just got lucky, county so-and-so, because you didn't get a case pulled, or you got one case pulled and it was correct. So we're really trying to say so-and-so doesn't have an error rate and so-and-so's is 20%. Like, it's just, that's not what it is. But your metro counties always get pulled because they have 80% of the caseload.
Thank you for explaining that. And I do think that's a difference in how it's talked about in other county administered states where there is a different financial setup. So we do have to be a little bit of careful about doing that cross-state comparison, because what's true in one state might not be true here. So I think that's a great way of explaining it, that it's a statewide error rate and we can assume because it's statistically accurate that it's true across the board, in Ohio.
Yep.
All right, I'm gonna do finish our slides and then we'll come back to the rest of the Q&A. So please keep the questions coming. These are really excellent questions and this is what the kind of conversation I was hoping we could get going today. So I know this, the folks who registered for this webinar was a mix of folks in government, adjacent to government, you may be working for counties, as well as a lot of community partners. And I just wanted to give us all a frame of reference for how I think we can work together on tackling the error rate without abandoning SNAP's core principles of access and timeliness. I think anyone who has worked on SNAP knows that the reason it's such a strong program and so important in our economy and in people's lives is because it grows as need grows and it shrinks as need shrinks. It's meant to be countercyclical. It's meant to be responsive to need. And it's meant to be that you get an application decision within 30 days, regardless of how many people applied. That is like a core principle of access in SNAP. And so we want to preserve that. We want to tackle this error rate without closing the front door and making it so hard to access that nobody who needs the program can get through. So I've been talking about this as community partners playing this partners in accuracy role. And that's going to require a commitment from counties to work more with their community partners and community partners to be more engaged with their counties. So I just wanted to walk through that a little bit and give you some real concrete things to think about, how you could incorporate this into your daily work. So just a few ideas of ways that community partners can help reduce the client side of the ledger that Betsy was talking about. So a couple of ideas. One, application assisters are very good at improving the quality of verification documents that get submitted on a SNAP application and at renewal. I know there are partners at the food bank down at Free Store Food Bank down in Cincinnati. They do an incredible job of helping people have, the right number of pay stubs and making sure they get that verification of their rent receipt, like really high quality assistance that's making those cases kind of strong from the jump and making it easier for the caseworker to get an accurate eligibility determination made. So that's one example, is quality of verification, helping people do that. Another one, as Betsy mentioned, a source of errors being income not reported because, it was a 50-cent wage increase, or, somebody moved into the household who has a job and they didn't realize that needed to be reported. So helping to educate the community about how income needs to be reported. Not every single thing has to be reported. We don't want to flood the counties with irrelevant changes, but really having that trained staff in the field, those assisters in the field who can help understand those reporting requirements, is going to be essential. And then, as I mentioned before, like, we can help minimize underpayments because that hurts people too, and it impacts the error rate too. So that can be, for example, if somebody turns in their rent receipt and they have their rent went up and they reported that to the agency, but they don't see their benefits go up, the next month. Well, they can follow up with the county and say, hey, did you get my rent receipt? Because if that case gets pulled 6 months later and that verification was sitting there, the agency had it, and the person was underpaid, that is an error. So helping people follow up on those changes that they report is another role that community partners can play. I also want to just say that if you are here, if you are in philanthropy, or you are a county who's never worked with your community partners before and are like, is that a good use of my time? I think there has never been a bigger return on investment in investing in these relationships, right? But that's what they are, they're relationships. Community partners, they are trusted messengers in the community. So if you want to push out a new message like, hey, we're changing how people are submitting documents, we're going to do something different to get more accurate. Well, sharing that information with your community partners early and often so they can push that message out is going to be way more effective than what you can do by yourself. And there's some really good examples. I know Cuyahoga County has some community partner engagement they do. Lucas County, I know Franklin County, and some of the smaller counties also already do this well, but it doesn't happen in all 88 counties. So I think this is an opportunity to do more. And also just know that those community partners out there are pretty knowledgeable. Many of them are former caseworkers, or have worked in government and really understand the SNAP rules. And so I think there's reason to trust that the expertise that they're providing is good, and also provide them with more training. If there's more that you want them to be doing and saying, I think that's where relationships can continue to be strengthened. Betsy, anything that you would add to this in terms of kind of the value of working with community partners that kind of with this new paradigm shift in SNAP?
No, I mean, to your point, I mean, we've spoken to county agencies together about they really are we are partners in payment accuracy. We all want the same thing, right? The correct benefit. You do understand the SNAP program very well, and that's super important to help with clients understanding and helping to get the right verification. So I mean, yeah, can't stress it enough that there is return on investment here. It saves your caseworkers time when community partners are able to help get a very complete case to you for review.
Great. And on the flip side of convincing counties to work with their community partners, I really want to ask all of you community partners to care about payment accuracy. If you've been whether or not you've been working in SNAP a long time, you might naturally think like, why is this my problem? Because it's all of our problems, right? This is this huge cost to the state if we don't get this tackled. And there are a couple of key reasons that I think you can help explain to your own boards, your own partners, about why you're focusing on this. One of them, as we already talked about, is that underpayments are just as big of a problem, and we want to tackle that. Also, repaying a SNAP overpayment is painful for families. If you weren't aware, every single overpayment that gets picked up in a quality control review, that has to be repaid by the household, even if they didn't make the mistake. I'm going to say that again. Even if it was an agency error, even if they did everything right, reported everything right, if they were overpaid, they will have to pay that back, either in a reduced SNAP benefit if they're continuing to be on SNAP, or pay it back another way if they're no longer on SNAP. So we really want to help people avoid an overpayment. And that includes, if clients misunderstand how SNAP works and thinks, oh, I'm just going to wait to report that income until my next renewal, because I want to keep the SNAP benefit higher for a little bit longer. That's not how SNAP works. So help make sure they understand that, so that nobody gets an overpayment who could be avoided. And then the last one, like this is tough to say out loud, but I think we're at a point where it's important to acknowledge, is that if we do end up with this big bill at the General Assembly, and we're talking about, as much as $388 million that we have to come up with, it's hard for me to see a scenario where that doesn't divert resources from other critical needs that we have in our community, right? Many of your organizations get some sort of TANF funding, maybe to help operate, or we have funding that helps pay for child welfare and adult protective services and all the other things that human services does for our community. And I think if we can all do what we can to keep SNAP benefits 100% federally funded, all of our other programs that we care about will benefit. And that's why we asked Advocates for Ohio's Future to host this, because I think we all, whether you're a SNAP nerd or not, kind of need to be in this together. All right. With that, I think we will go back to tackling some more of our questions. So Sarah, maybe I'll turn it to you. You've been keeping an eye on the very active Q&A box. Do you want to pitch some questions to Betsy and I?
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for all the great questions. Keep them coming. We have two questions about the same thing, about changes made in HR 1 to the standard utility allowance, and if that will impact error rates. Can you talk about that?
Yes, several changes in HR 1 impact error rates. Unfortunately, it's a quick implementation of changes to both citizen, like qualified aliens that are eligible, work requirements to certain new individuals, and then the standard utility allowance. It's now so. Well, before HR 1, anyone receiving a heat payment within the last 12 months could get the full standard utility allowance as a credit for an expense. Now HR 1 has limited it to only households with elderly and or disabled members. And so it's not that you can train staff that this is the change, but the problem is the system hasn't caught up, because it's not a quick fix to make systems comply with new rule changes. And it's a problem for every state. So caseworkers would have to do an override of every case of all the policy changes. So that's a struggle to make sure that not only do we get the policy out, the training done, but how do we make the system work with this? So it puts us at a risk of it not being done correctly, unfortunately. So we can do everything now to attack the errors we've been seeing, but now we've got the problem of these policy changes that you schedule system changes a year and a half out.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'd love to build on that a little bit to two things. One specific to the utility allowance for the legal aids and folks that are doing casework. People can still get the full standard utility allowance. They will now have to essentially reprove their eligibility. And to Betsy's point,
Yes, thank you, Rachel.
yeah, so they will, instead of getting it essentially automatically credited because they had a heat payment, the heat payment would only have been made if they could prove they had a utility bill. So it's duplicating verification, but you can still help someone get that deduction if you help them actually verify it.
Yeah.
So that's one piece.
Yep. And the heat payment will count as income to the households so it's another place
A double whammy.
Yeah.
A double whammy. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
And then I think the other point you made that I think we can all lift up to our federal delegation, if you're engaged in those conversations, is explaining this connection between the timing the bill gave the Congress did not give states enough time to implement this for it to not impact the error rate. So, if you were a practical person and you wanted to really say, these are the new rules, let's hold states to them, we would give a much longer implementation runway. We would maybe say if we were making changes in fiscal year 2026 to comply with the new eligibility rules, well, then we really shouldn't be looking at the quality control rate until fiscal year maybe 28, when there's been time for all of those system changes to go into effect. So I think that is a message we can be lifting up, because there is
Thank you.
time to potentially delay implementation if we have those conversations.
Yep. Because policy changes always create a blip in some seeing errors.
Thank you so much. The next question, do appeals like for application denials or disputed benefit amounts increase payment error rates?
No.
And in fact, I might even go so far, tell me if I'm wrong about this, Betsy, but to say it's one of the many ways I think you can help a benefit be correct. If you were a legal aid attorney who's representing someone and helping them with an appeal because they think they've been underpaid, and the mechanism to do that is through an appeal, and you fix the case before it gets pulled in a QC review, then you helped. So that,
Yep.
I think it's random whether the case would ever get pulled, and maybe there's a small chance, but every case is going to matter.
Thank you. There's a question, does every state get the same amount of cases pulled for QC?
So yes, basically there's one of two options, and most states, like Ohio, do the 1200.
Thank you. Why do QC reviewers use different verification standards than eligibility caseworkers?
Because the 310 and policy are not always aligned, or there have been state options, because there have been state options developed over the years to help make it more customer service friendly, or to reduce administrative inefficiencies, but yet QC will still have to come in and do some stuff. But we are taking a hard look at that and saying, well, what is QC doing? We're going to do it that way because now we can't afford to, do something that might be easier for someone, because it's a financial threat to, not
Yeah. And
follow
honestly,
QC.
as an advocate, I think there's it's important that I'm grateful that ODGFS isn't making any gut moves. Like you're really studying the impact of these things before you're making big sweeping policy changes, because I am hearing about some other states who are just kind of knee-jerk reaction saying, oh, let's do, way more verification, or let's interview them way more often. And that's introducing new opportunity for error. So more human touches,
Yeah.
not necessarily less error prone. And we need to be careful about that.
I'll say one thing, like, we've heard, so with broad-based categorical eligibility, we increased our FPL to 200%. And the question was, well, does that, put us at risk of more errors? No, it actually lets the clients have a much bigger, leeway for income changes without going over the eligibility threshold. And so, and we didn't see a huge caseload increase with that, but it is allowing people who are on benefits under 130 start to, make some headway in working more hours, but keeping some benefits. Rachel, like you, I've heard of other states like going to 6-month certifications. And, when you're losing 25% of your admin, that's not, in my opinion, not a great idea to tackle client caused errors. I mean, we're really trying to just be better about messaging. If you have any kind of income change, please tell us. Job change, or someone comes into the house with income, let us know. And if you can help spread that word and keep clients informed, we think that's going to be more impactful than having 6-month certification. So Rachel, I agree. Some have we're changing this, but I just don't know if it's the right move. So
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. And actually goes to a couple of questions that I'm noticing, Sarah, that I'll try to knock out. So one of them was, to that point, if the person's income increases, but it is below that reporting threshold, is that still an error? And so no, if it's below the reporting threshold, it wouldn't be an error. Where we need to help folks is sometimes they're right on that border of what is and isn't, and they need some support to be able to know if it's reportable. And so there is a little bit of like, when in doubt, if you have a new income, go ahead and report it.
Right.
But it wouldn't be an error unless it was over the threshold.
Right. And that's something we're learning, not just with clients, but with caseworkers, that if we can simplify the procedure or the process or the message, we think it's going to have more impact than, I mean, can you imagine having to figure, if this wasn't your life, like Rachel and I are SNAP nerds, like, to say, well, report when your income goes over 130% for your assistance group. I don't know what that means. All right. So it's just like report changes in your income, job, we're really trying to simplify it. And we have done some video trainings we released this week, 5 minutes, where we told caseworkers, like, our clients may not understand when you say income, it doesn't mean a job. Like, is it someone giving you money every month to help pay bills? Is it unearned income from Social Security, unemployment? Like, really, like, explaining what income can be. And then also and then focusing on this, what we're talking about is there's a lot of rights and responsibilities, but before you get off, make sure they understand the report changes in income above all else. So, like, we're really trying to drive that home with everyone.
Yeah, and I'll just take that to answer another one of these questions, which says, is the state taking a look at actual SNAP interviews to ensure that clients are actually being educated? So the interview is critically important in SNAP. It always has been. It's going to continue to be. Yes, for income reporting, but also for all the other eligibility details. With work requirements changing, they really need to use interviews to do adequate screening. They need to use the interview to make sure the household's composition is correct. It wasn't on our top 5 errors, but that's another really hard policy to get right when some people are work required, some people are a student and they're excluded. There's lots of complicated rules about how the household is made. And so we need our county caseworkers to be able to invest time in a really quality interview up front to reduce errors.
I agree.
All right, Sarah, any others that are jumping out to you? I know we've got about 7 minutes left.
Yeah, there's a good question here from going back to your chart, Rachel, about looking at other states. If there are some reasons that Wisconsin might perform better than other Midwestern states, or maybe even extrapolating, are there lessons learned or kind of co-learning that states can engage in with each other?
So yes, there are national groups on QC stuff, and our QC section chief has met with Wisconsin multiple times. We are aligned with what they're doing and what we're doing. And so I don't know if there's a different, like when I talked about caseworkers, like, we're county administered. We don't have as much, we have a lot of turnover. I don't know about Wisconsin's turnover. I know people have struggled with staffing across the nation during and since the pandemic, but I don't know. Rachel, do you have any maybe more insight? Because from the QC perspective, we're like doing everything they're doing.
Policies are the same. Yeah, and it's so complicated, and staff capacity and local operations do play a huge role in it. The only things I can add about Wisconsin that make them, I think, especially unique nationwide is they're kind of regionally administered. There was a big lawsuit some years ago, and the state actually took over Milwaukee County. So Milwaukee was operated by the state, and then the other counties sort of formed into regions where they did a workload sharing, but it was kind of all the result of a big lawsuit. So they're the only state I know of in the country that operates that way. And I think that lawsuit also put a lot of pressure on adequate staffing, investments in technology, structures that have really taken them 10 or 12 years to build up a really robust operation system with a lot of investment that was forced by that court decision. So I'm sure I'm oversimplifying it somewhat, And there are definitely lessons to be learned from those investments, especially to Betsy's point about this being a year where we can still invest while it's still 50-50 admin funds. So maybe more to come on that. Maybe we'll have a Midwest, best practice sharing webinar at some point we could do.
Great. And looking at Ohio's error rate over the last 5 years, there is a question here. Do we know why Ohio's error rate went up in federal fiscal year 24? Or what can you say about what we're looking at in Ohio?
Um, there's been since the pandemic was ending, there was a lot of shift there were temporary procedures and policies in place, and then there was Medicaid unwinding. And so changings in staff, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of things that kind of went into play, but it's not one thing that caused the error rates to go up.
Yeah, there's another question here I'd love to ask while Betsy's still with us, which is, it says, is the state looking at improving the benefits portal to make it easier for people to report, or any other innovative ways to make it easier to
Yes.
report?
So, our self-service portal will be revamped in January. It'll be a lot better looking, went through a lot of human-centered design processes to help get it right. And then also, when we, as part of the client to report the reporting responsibilities, we have text or calls, depending on what they've opted into or not, that remind them of their reporting responsibilities. So you have initial certification, then 3 months later, that text or call, then their interim report at 6 months, and then at 9 months, a text or call reminding them of their reporting requirements, and then recertification. It was just a text or call that was here's a link to your reporting responsibilities. We've scratched that and said, please report any income changes. And we've listed them, if someone's moved in with income. But in maybe November or January, we will then have the ability for them to report that change from the text without having to have a self-service portal account or to sign into the it's some technology that just kind of came up in the last year and a half. And so we're going to utilize it on this as well to make it easier for them to report. But it will be easier on self-service portal as well.
That's amazing. I think that we have just about answered all of the questions in the Q&A. Is there anything else? Betsy and Rachel, you've shared so much incredible information today. Thank you. Is there anything else standing out in your mind that you'd like to share with the audience?
Betsy,
Go
I
ahead,
was
Rachel.
giving you a first
I'll
pass.
let you, no, Rachel, I'll let you close this out.
All right. Well, I will just say, please stay. I'm so grateful that people stayed on for this whole hour to talk about such a nerdy topic. And I would just ask folks to kind of stay engaged with it. Please feel free to reach out to me anytime. I can put my email address in the chat that everybody can see. Because I really do want to hear what ideas you have, what struggles you hear that households are having when they're trying to report income. We know that getting through by phone to the counties can sometimes be challenging depending on what county you're in and how long the wait time is. So to Betsy's point about the portal, we do want to encourage other ways for people to report changes that are less burdensome than just waiting on the phone. So I welcome those ideas. And Betsy, I don't know if you'd add anything to that.
Yeah, I would love if you could encourage individuals to sign up for text messaging. I think it is a much better technique to find out information about their case, get updated about and reminders, and again to report that change. I think it's just that would be helpful if you can help encourage folks.
Awesome.
Great. Thank you so much. It's really a joy and an honor to be able to host both of you SNAP experts, nationally recognized for your knowledge and all of your incredible work. So thank you for your time. Thank you to everyone who joined, and we'll have the recording and the slides out this afternoon. Have a great Friday.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Betsy. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.